Good morning. It's Bonnie Jean coming to you from Galveston Bay. Here's the long awaited story of Miles, and the only word I can come up with is hell that I've been through in the last 3 years dealing with his estate. Let me tell you a little bit about Miles. He was quite a character. Um, I met him in 1973. I believe he had an old soul. Um, when we met, I moved in next door to him, and we quickly became very good friends. Uh, it was never a romantic situation between Miles and I. He was more like a brother, and we were always there for each other. I was there for him when he needed help, and he was there for me when I needed help. We had worked together a lot over the years. He was a carpenter and a very good one, and I was in construction, and so we had that opportunity, but we were best buds. Over the years, we had lost everybody, basically. Now, except Janice, his old girlfriend, they had reconnected when Miles moved up to this 40 acres up in Cleveland. Miles had a couple of houses over in the Heights. He lived in one, and the one next door was he used it for his office and his shop area. And so once those sold, because everybody in the Heights was buying up all these old houses and, of course, putting up these big, massive homes. Miles did pretty good on that sale. So he went up to Cleveland, and for $1,000 an acre, he bought 40 acres. Somewhere he got a big shipping crate. It wasn't like the shipping containers that you see on these container ships. It was a big wooden crate, probably 8 foot by 8 foot and about 6 foot tall. He lived in that for probably 2 years while he built his house. It was a simple house, it was a ranch style home, one bedroom, two bath, and he had an antique room because Miles was into antiques. Like I said, he was an old soul. At one point, he had gotten into the antique radios, the old Philcos and RCAs, the Victrolas, the old ones that were in a cabinet with the tubes. Um, he restored them at one point. I think he had like 125 of them completely restored, and they were all working. So when he built this house, of course, he built an antique room for his antiques. So once he's up on the farm, he decides he needs a tractor. So Miles, at one point, he got into antique tractors, restoring them completely, and he had like 16 antique tractors that every one of them looked like they were brand new, and they all ran just like they supposed to. So he and Janice had gotten back together, and she was up there living with him on that property probably about 17 years. Um, 2 years before he started getting really sick, she ended up leaving. So, but one day they're sitting on the porch, and this guy comes walking up the driveway. Now the driveway was like about 1,000 feet from the road, and this guy comes walking up the driveway, very brazen of him. He had seen a travel trailer sitting up on the front of the property, and he walked up the driveway one day and asked Miles. He said, "Hey, man, you want to rent me this travel trailer up here?" So Miles did. I think it was $200 a month. There was no water plumbed in up there at the road. There was a power pole, and so Miles never saw this guy except for when he was coming up to pay rent, and to fill up a big water container on the back of his truck so he could have water up at the travel trailer. He was kind of a recluse. He spent most of his time uh, in that trailer on his computer. Um, he kind of considered himself a self-taught lawyer because he had been fighting a case in court. I think he, I think it was something about he had abused a woman, and it's hard to explain to you just the kind of personality that this man was, David. So after Janice left, um, David starts interjecting himself into Miles's business a little bit more and more, and so he asked Miles one day, and because Miles was getting sick, he had COPD, he was starting to get ill. And I noticed that really coming on when he had come up to Trinity to help me replace a French door with a big sliding patio door. And I could see something was definitely taking a toll on him. So he got to the point where Moss got to the point where he couldn't go out and work any longer. Not sure if you're familiar with River Oaks in Houston, but it's a very highfalutin neighborhood, and that's where all of his customers were. Um, and he could no longer go in and work. He was only making $820 a month, I think, on Social Security, and so it was getting very hard on him. Well, David comes in one day and asks Miles, did he have a will? And Miles says, yes, I have a will. So I was the executrix of that will uh, with, the beneficiaries that he wanted to bless when he passed. Well, his son and oldest granddaughter were on that will, and he decided that he wanted to redo his will. Uh, Actually, David told him, he said, Miles, after reading the will, he said, Miles, this will never hold up in probate court. Well, I think that was a lie. Um, David was good at lies. So Miles thought he had better take his son and the oldest granddaughter off his will because they had been into drugs and in and out of prison. It was just a really bad situation, and he had these other two granddaughters um, that he wanted to bless. Um, so Miles calls me. Now David had told him. He said, "Miles, I'll be." David didn't know that Miles and I were so close, and he told Miles when he read that will. He said, "I'd be glad to take care of your estate for you." So Miles called me and told me that, and he got a big laugh out of that. He said, "This guy thinks I'm going to let him take care of my affairs." So Miles told me, he said, I need to get my will redone. He said, but I don't think I can muster up the energy to go to an attorney. I said, okay. So the next day I went into Miles's house, and I knew that in the state of Texas, you can do a holographic will, which is basically a handwritten will. So I went in, pulled up some information on Google, and told Miles how to write it out, and he did. It was a very simple will. Um, he named me as the executor and beneficiary. Um, he was having a hard time just even writing that out. So he didn't want to sit there too long and write out a whole bunch of stuff about who he wanted to have what. So, but he told me what he wanted to happen. And so that was the promise that I made to Miles, that I would handle it. I would do what I could do to get his wishes accomplished. Well, like I said, Miles wasn't making very much money a month, and he was having a hard time making ends meet. And he smoked, which is expensive, and he liked to drink his Weller and Pepsi, um, which is another expensive thing to because he drank a lot. Um, so he thought, well, I'll sell the property if you'll help me get out of here. And I said, Miles, I'll do whatever you need me to do. So we started talking about selling the property. At this point, it was 29 acres. He had already sold 11 acres of this 40 up front to a man named Angel. So I got in touch with Angel and asked him if he'd be interested in buying this remaining 29 acres. And oh, absolutely, he was ready. Um, Meantime, David had found out that Burlington North and Santa Fe Railroad were fixing to put in a big logistics center across the street. There had been 1,300 acres that had been for sale for years across the street from Miles's house. It finally sold, and this big facility was fixing to go in. So David saw an opportunity. He thought to himself, this 29 acres is going to skyrocket in price. So he approached Miles and about buying that 29 acres, about the sale of it and what it was going to do and all that kind of stuff. The day that I went in to help Miles with the will, um, it was all he could do to muster up enough energy to put his overalls on so that we could go up to the bank. So we went up to the bank. They wouldn't notarize it because it was a will. But while we were there, we set things up as far as his bank account, and that he put me on that account and the safe deposit box. And of course, I had to show a death certificate to be able to get to any of that. But uh, the day that we did that, when we got back, I got Miles settled, got him some food, and got him settled. And when I was leaving, I stopped to talk to David. Well, David looked at me. First thing he says, "So Miles is leaving you everything?" I said, "No, Miles is leaving me in charge of everything." "Well, I don't know, I don't know how all that's going to work." Well, David was standing right there when Miles was writing out this will. David's the one that told him that we had to put the power of attorney and medical directive on a separate paper because that wouldn't go into effect until we probated the will. So David knew what was going on. He's a sneaky snake. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read Acts 13:10. Um, this is how I think about David. "You are a child of the devil and an enemy of everything that is right. You are full of all kinds of deceit and trickery. You will never stop perverting the right ways of the Lord." That's David. So, David, knowing that I was already the power of attorney for Miles, I was, um, of course, a real estate agent, so I handled most of Miles's real estate endeavors. So David shows up over at Miles's, and he presents a spiral notebook with a contract written on it. Got Miles to he enticed Miles and said that he would give Miles $1,000 a month, and Miles could stay in his house until he passed. Well, we all knew that was imminent. I mean, everybody knew that Miles was sick and he would soon pass. Now, over the years, I had pushed Miles and pushed Miles, I guess, about accepting Christ as a savior, and he did that. So Miles and I were very comfortable with his passing. He was ready, um, and I was trying to prepare myself for that. But David goes over there and he entices Miles. He said, "Miles, I'll let you stay in your house until you die. And I'll pay you $1,000 a month. And then we'll do this on a 5-year balloon note. And after 5 years, I'll pay the balance of the note. And so Miles, he agreed to that. Now, Janice, she was still coming around because Miles was sick and she was coming in and helping and, being a great asset to me. Because like I said, I was an hour away from Miles. Now, my daughter lived 3 miles from Miles, 3 miles from Miles. And so if he needed cigarettes or whiskey, I'd call her and say, "Hey, would you make a run for Miles?" Now he always kept cash in the house, to pay for all that kind of stuff. So she would go run these errands a lot, and uh, he would hand her, probably an extra $10 or $20 for every time she would do that. So now at one point, I got hospice involved. Um, Janice and David and I were all in Miles's bedroom one day and trying to figure out how to get him some help. It was more help than what any of us could do. So I ended up getting hospice involved. Now hospice brought Miles a bunch of drugs. I think morphine, um, some other pain type medications, and some anxiety drugs. Well, Miles didn't like taking the pain medications. They constipated him so bad that I was sending him that magnesium citrate stuff that'll clean you out. But Miles didn't like taking those drugs. And then David, he says that he's going to be there to help, because he's on the property. He'll be there to help and take care of stuff. Well, little did I know he was helping himself to everything that Miles had. Um, Somehow or another, he was even in Miles's bank account. The man is evil. David's mother was a nurse, so David took it upon himself, since he had this medical knowledge about drugs, that he would administer the drugs. Well, Miles only wanted to take the anxiety medications. He didn't like the pain pills. So one day we're all in Miles's bedroom. Janice is on one side of the bed, I'm on the other, and David is sitting in a chair at the foot of the bed. Uh, by this time, Miles he was sick, pretty much bedridden. So I'm begging Miles, because I already had this guy up front ready to move on the 40 acres. I mean, the other 29 acres. And I told Miles, I said, Miles, you don't have to do anything, honey. If you can just get in my truck, I will take care of you. I'll take you to my house. I talked to him and told him everything I thought I could do for him to keep him from selling to David for this no interest, no down payment promise of $1,000 a month. That was like dangling a carrot in front of Miles, knowing that he could stay in his house. I saw all that, and it was like, you know, okay, Miles, okay. I said, but you're tying me to this man for the next 5 years. He said, Bonnie, I want to die in my own home. I said, okay, Miles, I'll handle it. Okay. Well, one day Miles gives me a call, and he says, this was August 18th of 2022. He said, hey, David wants to know if I'd be willing to move out of the house if he got a buyer for the property. I said, well, Miles, whatever you want to do. Um, I'll come get you and you can stay with me. Uh, Now I was trying to sell my at one point I was trying to sell my house, and we were going to sell his property because over the years he and I both talked about when we got old we were going to sit on the front porch in our rocking chairs and talk about old times because we had some great old times. So I said, Miles, I'll come get you. You can stay with me when the sale is finished and you get your proceeds. Then we'll work something out. We'll decide, whatever it is that you want to do, and that's what we'll do. But it might cost them an extra $100,000 because I knew that David was planning on turning this $500,000 property into a $3 million property. Um, Only because of the Burlington North Santa Fe Railroad going in across the street. So I kind of said that like off the cuff. I said, "Yeah, I'll help you out, Miles. Whatever you want to do, but it might cost him an extra $100,000." Well, I know Miles, and that's exactly what he told David. He said, "Yeah, I'll move if it'll cost you an extra $100,000 to buy me out of that part of the contract." I know Miles. I know that happened. This is where it gets sticky. 2 days later, and I had talked to Miles every day on the phone. We talked every day on the phone. Well, 2 days later was a Saturday, and I was out taking care of stuff. I don't remember what I was doing, but I was busy all day and didn't have a chance to call Miles. And I usually tried to catch him before about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or he had already been into his whiskey. So I get home and I get a phone call. It's 5:30 in the afternoon, August 20th. Um, I get a phone call from David. Miles is gone. I said, "Well, where'd he go?" He said, "No, he's gone." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "The house is on fire." Miles perished in that house fire. Now, this is getting a little emotional for me. I'm going to try to get through this. I've been promising y'all I'm sorry. So, Miles is lost in this fire. Um, Now, David, when we did get a you know legal papers, David did get legal papers drawn up on the house. His David's brother um, was in charge of the trust that was buying uh, the 29 acres. So I called, and everybody knew that when Miles passed, that they were to that I was going to give them a new account number for them to start sending the payments to. So I called the brother and I told him, I said, "Man, I am so sorry, you know, that it happened like this." I said, I'm sorry about the house." And he said, "Bonnie, we didn't buy that land for the house." I said, "I know." So the fire marshal gives me a call, because I'm considered, I guess, the next of kin. Um, and we start talking. So I go in and have a sit down with the fire marshal, and they had all these pictures of this house. Now, as soon as I heard that the house was on fire, and knowing what had taken place the day, 2 days earlier, about David wanting to know if Miles would be willing to move if he got a buyer for the property, and I told Miles, yeah, it'll cost him an extra $100,000. I knew something was desperately wrong with this situation. Um, I went in and talked to the fire marshal and told him what I thought. I believed that David went in and fixed a drink for Miles. Now, Miles's medication from hospice was all the way across the other side of the house in the kitchen on the windowsill. I don't think Miles could have gotten to it at that point, but I believe that David fixed him a cocktail bomb because the autopsy read that his alcohol level was 1 point something, and I think the legal limit of alcohol is 0.08, and Miles was 1 point something. Plus, he had all these drugs in his system. It was almost like an overdose situation. I I have it in my spirit that David fixed him this death cocktail and went out. It was August 20th, and we were in a drought. And David went out and pushed a bunch of leaves and pine needles up underneath the end of Miles's bedroom and flicked his bick. It's almost like it's a vision. I can see it happening. So when I was in talking to the fire marshal, I told him all of this, and he said, the problem here is there were no accelerants, which means they could not determine a cause of the fire. So it wasn't but a couple of weeks after this, David contacts me and he says, we need to do something about a reduction in our loan. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, the house is gone, and that was a value on the property, and we need you to readjust, the loan uh, balance to reflect a reduction. And I said, well, wait a minute. These papers that you wrote up indicate that borrower, which is you and your brother, um, are to maintain insurance on the structures. Um, where's that insurance? Do you have that insurance? No. So this goes into the last 3 years of this court battle. Now, I'm going to save the court part. I'll do that in the next day or two. Because I don't want this to run too long. I'm almost 30 minutes into this. The last 3 years has been hell. Our court system, I don't know that this particular court is corrupt. I wouldn't say that. It's just that it's taking so long to get things taken care of in the court. Um, the attorneys my attorney has over $100,000 for the attorney. Their attorney has filed motion now on top of the original lawsuit that they filed. They filed motion after motion after motion, probably 8 or 9 motions. Well, the judge in this case denied every one of them. The last motion they filed was to allow them to put this $1,000 a month into the court registry instead of sending it to uh, the account that I had for Miles's estate, which every time a payment came in, I was turning around 2 days later and sending it to the attorney. Uh, he was pretty good about hanging in there with me because, I mean, my attorney fee was getting way up there, and having to go through all of these motions, and of course that makes my attorney have to turn around and file a reply. And um, I told y'all that I felt like uh, praying that this judge would have discernment, and I believe he did. Um, but that's kind of the situation I've been in for 3 years dealing with this. It's kept me tied here. Um, I mean, I am down here in San Leon close to my sister, but it was close enough to where I could get to Conroe to take care of all this. And, I just, I've put my life on hold for the last 3 years. Um, I've lost sleep, countless hours of sleep, thinking about this and thinking about Miles and losing him in such a horrific way. Um, like I said, I was prepared. I was preparing myself. I don't know if you can totally prepare yourself to lose somebody that you love so much, but I was working on preparing myself um, because I didn't want Miles to continue to just live like he was, just deteriorating, and um, his his everyday health just failing. So, and we prayed about it, that God would go ahead and take him, but not like that, not like that in the fire. It's been hard. It's been real hard. And then having to deal what uh, with this David fella. It's been tough, and I've just been raw and on edge. You know, so I'll come back out tomorrow, um, and I'll tell you about the court. We went to court last Tuesday. Uh, Monday was Labor Day, so the court started on Tuesday. And I will come back tomorrow and tell you about the court. I believe my prayer was answered about the judge having discernment, um, but it's all crazy. Our court system is just the way it's set up. I don't know. I just think it's wrong. It needs to be revamped. Now, and I'm not even talking about the justice system, which I think is totally corrupt, but the court system. So, uh, I'm not. I'm not even going to say a prayer today. I want y'all to pray though. Uh, I'm going to sit in my truck here for a minute and enjoy the bay. It's a beautiful day. Um, Everything does come to an end. These are the trials and tribulations sometimes that we have to go through in life. But I'm asking you, whatever you're going through, don't give up. Don't give up hope. Um, just remain strong as you can. And if you need to cry it out, cry it out. It helps. So I bid y'all a fair adieu, um, and I'll be back tomorrow. Just remember this, that I love you and God loves you. Please don't ever forget that. Y'all have a good day. Bye.